Rescue Bobcat refused to drop his toy. The shocking reason why it kept a heart beating. The ranger's truck tires sprayed gravel and mud as it skidded to a halt outside the Timberline Animal Rescue Station. Rain hammered the metal roof like 1,000 angry fists, each drop exploding against the pavement in a fury that matched the violence of the storm. Gideon Hayes stood under the shelter's overhang, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold, watching the young ranger stumble out of the driver's seat. "Got a bobcat," Boyd called over the downpour, rain streaming down his face. "Found it at an accident scene. Something's wrong with this one." "Gideon." The old man set down his mug and walked into the rain without bothering with a coat. Water soaked through his flannel shirt immediately, plastering the faded fire department logo to his chest. He'd stopped caring about getting wet 12 years ago. Stopped caring about a lot of things after the fire that took his team and left him standing alone in the ashes. The transport cage sat in the truck bed, door hanging open. Inside, pressed into the furthest corner, was a bobcat unlike any Gideon had seen in his decades working nights at the rescue station. Its amber and brown coat was matted with mud, black spots barely visible through the grime, but that wasn't what stopped him cold. The cat was curled around something, its entire body forming a protective shell. Even from this distance, even through the sheets of rain, Gideon could see it trembling. "We put food right there," Boyd said, pointing to a dish of fresh meat just outside the cage door. The smell should have drawn any hungry predator. "Won't leave that corner, won't let go of whatever it's holding." Gideon climbed into the truck bed, his boots clanging against metal. The sound made the bobcat flinch, but it didn't move from its position. He crouched down, water dripping from his gray hair, and looked into those amber eyes. Fear stared back at him. Not the wild fear of a captured animal plotting escape, but something deeper, something broken. This cat had seen things that shattered more than bone. "What's it holding?" Gideon asked. Boyd shook his head. "Some kind of stuffed animal. Rabbit, looks like. Wouldn't let us near it, Jen." "Did you try to take it?" The ranger had the decency to look ashamed. "Yeah, used a control stick. That's when it made this sound." He paused, rubbing his face. "Never heard anything like it." "Gideon, wasn't a hiss or a growl, it was crying." Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to feel in their chests. The bobcat pressed harder into the corner, but its front paws pushed forward, shoving the object it protected deeper under its body. Gideon could just make out torn brown fabric, soaked through, one ear hanging by threads. "Help me get the cage inside," Gideon said, "and call Dr. Aris. Tell him we need him tonight, not tomorrow." They carried the cage through the rain and into the isolation room, a concrete space with harsh fluorescent lights and wire mesh partitions. The moment they set it down, Gideon killed most of the lights, leaving only one pale bulb burning in the corner. The bobcat's eyes followed his every movement, feral and calculating, but it still hadn't moved from its defensive crouch. "I'm opening the transfer gate," Gideon said quietly, more to himself than the cat. "You go on in when you're ready. Nobody's going to rush you." He pulled the lever that opened the passage into the larger isolation cage, then retreated to the shadows. Boyd stood by the door, watching. Minutes passed. The rain outside softened to a steady drumming. Still the bobcat didn't move. Then, slowly, it stood. The stuffed rabbit slipped from under its body, and the cat immediately grabbed it in its jaws. Gentle as a mother carrying a kitten, it limped into the isolation cage, favoring its left hind leg. Blood left small, dark prints on the concrete. Once inside, the bobcat didn't explore its new surroundings, didn't check for escape routes or safe corners. It laid the rabbit on the cold floor and pressed its nose against the toy's chest. Push, pause, push, pause, push, pause. A steady rhythm, desperate and precise. "What's it doing?" Boyd whispered. Gideon's throat tightened. He knew exactly what it was doing. He'd done the same thing 12 years ago, pressing his hands against a small chest that wouldn't rise, counting compressions while the forest burned around them. The bobcat lowered its head, pressing one ear against the soaked wool, listening. Then it began the nose pushes again, faster this time, more frantic. Dr. Eris arrived 30 minutes later. his medical bag slung over one shoulder, hair still disheveled from sleep. He was young, barely 30, with the confidence of someone who believed every animal problem had a medical solution. He studied the bobcat through the mesh, making notes on his tablet. Classic obsessive-compulsive behavior, he announced, severe attachment to an object. Likely developed during extreme trauma. The leg wound needs immediate attention, but we'll have to sedate to treat it. The stuffed animal needs to be removed. It's reinforcing the neurotic behavior. No, Gideon said. Eris turned, surprised. Mr. Hayes, I understand you have more field experience, but from a veterinary standpoint, it's not trying to possess the rabbit. Gideon interrupted. Look at the pattern. Look at what it's doing. They watched together. The bobcat had returned to its rhythm, pressing and listening, pressing and listening. It thinks the rabbit's alive, Gideon said quietly. It's trying to wake it up, trying to make it breathe. The young vet's expression shifted from certainty to horror. That's impossible. It's a wild animal. It can't conceptualize. I've seen grief before, Dr. Eris, across a lot of species. This cat is grieving. The injured hound in the next cage chose that moment to wake, barking loud enough to rattle the mesh partition. It lunged forward, teeth bared, hackles raised. The bobcat transformed instantly. From a trembling creature hunched over a toy, it rose to its full height, fur standing on end in a primal display. The stuffed rabbit disappeared behind its body. The cat made no sound, but its eyes locked onto the hound with an intensity that made even Gideon step back. This was a predator ready to kill or die. The hound, sensing something fundamental and terrifying in that stare, whimpered and retreated to its corner. We'll treat the leg tomorrow, Eris said, suddenly much quieter. After it's had time to decompress. And when the vet left, Gideon pulled a folding chair from the supply closet and positioned it across from the cage. Boyd had gone home hours ago. The night shift belonged to Gideon alone, the way he preferred. Too many ghosts walked these halls for company. The bobcat had stopped its frantic attempts to revive the rabbit. Now it sat beside the toy, one paw resting protectively on the torn fabric. Its amber eyes reflected the pale light, unblinking, watching Gideon with the wariness of prey that knows predators hunt at night. A draft whistled through the gap under the door, carrying the damp cold of the Ouachita forest after rain. The bobcat began to shiver, violent tremors running through its small frame. Gideon recognized hypothermia when he saw it. The animal was soaked to the bone, had been for hours, and shock was setting in. He stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The cat tracked him with its eyes, but didn't react as he walked to his locker and pulled out his old fleece jacket. The fire department logo had faded to ghosts of letters, worn thin by years of washing, but Gideon had never been able to throw it away. It was the jacket he'd been wearing the day his team died. He returned to the cage and crouched down, holding the jacket where the bobcat could see it. Then, moving inch by careful inch, he pushed it through the narrow gap at the bottom of the mesh. The cat didn't move for a full minute. Then it stood, limped forward, and grabbed the jacket in its teeth. Gideon expected it to drag the fleece into its corner, to burrow into the warmth. Instead, the bobcat carried the jacket to where the stuffed rabbit lay, and carefully, almost tenderly, draped the fabric over the toy. It arranged the sleeves, using its nose to tuck the edges under the rabbit's body, ensuring complete coverage. Then it curled up beside the covered toy, outside the jacket's warmth, and closed its eyes. Gideon sat back in his chair and put his face in his hands. The night deepened. The rescue station settled into its familiar sounds, the hum of the refrigeration units, the occasional bark or whine from the other animals, the tick of the old heating pipes. Gideon dozed in his chair, chin on his chest, but woke every few minutes to check on the bobcat. Each time he opened his eyes, the cat was awake, frantically searching. It would pat the ground with its front paws, head swinging in panic, until it located the rabbit under the jacket. Only then would it dare to lie down again. 30 seconds later, the cycle repeated. At 3 in the morning, Gideon gave up on sleep entirely. He pulled his chair closer to the cage and sat in the dim light, watching the animal destroy itself with vigilance. "You can rest," he said quietly. "I'll watch." The bobcat's ear swiveled toward his voice, but it didn't stop its frantic checking. Gideon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sewing kit he kept for repairing equipment. He'd noticed the tear in the rabbit's ear, the way the bobcat obsessively licked at the exposed stuffing, ignoring its own bleeding leg to tend to the toy's wound. He held up the spool of red thread where the cat could see it. "Torn, isn't it?" he said. "Hurts a lot, right?" The bobcat stopped hissing. For the first time since arriving, it approached the front of the cage. It picked up the rabbit in its mouth, gentle despite the fangs, and placed it directly in front of where Gideon sat. Then it backed up one step and waited. The trust in that gesture hit Gideon like a fist to the chest. He got down on the cold concrete floor, his knees protesting, and threaded a needle. The bobcat watched intently. Gideon took off his shirt, revealing the burn scars that covered his left shoulder and chest, and made a show of sewing up a tear in the fabric. The cat's eyes followed the needle, watched the thread pull the wound closed. Then Gideon pushed the needle through the mesh. The spaces were barely large enough, and he had to work at an awkward angle. But he managed to touch the rabbit's torn ear. The bobcat growled, a low rumble of warning. Gideon froze. "I'm just fixing it," he said. "Like you'd want to fix it if you had hands." He made the first stitch. The bobcat fell silent. Then, deliberately, it placed both front paws on the rabbit, holding it steady against the floor so Gideon could work. The position was uncomfortable, forcing Gideon to lean forward. His arm extended through the mesh at an angle that made his shoulder scream. One swipe from those claws would shred his hand to bone. But the cat held perfectly still, its breathing steady, its eyes on the needle. Gideon stitched in silence for a while, then found himself talking. "I hate thunder too," he said. His voice sounded strange in the empty room, rusty from disuse. "My wife, Sarah, she used to be the same. Any storm, she'd wake me up, make me sit with her till it passed. Drove me crazy for years." He pulled the thread through another stitch. "Then she died. Stroke. Sudden. Nothing anyone could do. Now when it storms, I lie awake wishing she was there to keep me up." The bobcat's eyes blinked slowly, that cat gesture of peace and trust. "Lost my team in a fire 12 years back." Gideon continued, his hands working automatically. "I was crew chief. We got a call about a wildfire in the Wachita. Wind had shifted, trapping some hikers. My team went in. I went with them. The fire jumped the line. We tried to deploy our shelters, but it was too fast, too hot." He tied off a stitch. "I made it out. They didn't. Sarah was already gone by then. Felt like I should have stayed in that fire too." He finished the last stitch and cut the thread. The rabbit's ear was whole again, the tear closed with small, neat stitches. "Sometimes we hold on to things," Gideon said, pushing the rabbit back through the mesh, "even when everyone tells us to let go, because letting go feels like a second death, like admitting they're really gone." The bobcat picked up the rabbit and retreated to its corner. But this time, when it curled around the toy, it didn't check every 30 seconds. It laid its head down and closed its eyes. Gideon returned to his chair and watched the cat sleep. Morning came with harsh light and the bustle of the day shift. Ranger Boyd arrived at 7, carrying a muddy backpack sealed in an evidence bag. "Found this at the accident scene," he said, setting it on the desk. "Took a while to get it processed, but I thought maybe it belonged to the girl." "What girl?" Gideon asked, though cold dread was already settling in his stomach. "The accident, where we found the bobcat. There was a 12-year-old kid, Ivy something. Car went off the road during the storm. Driver didn't make it. Girl's in a coma at County General. That's why they called us. Girl was hypothermic, pulse barely there. But the weird thing, the cat was lying on her chest when we found her, had to tranquilize it to get it off." Boyd opened the evidence bag. The smell hit them immediately: wet fabric, mud, and underneath it, the distinct scent of a child's shampoo, fruity, synthetic, the kind marketed to kids. The bobcat in the cage went insane. It threw itself at the mesh, claws scrabbling for purchase, making a sound Gideon had never heard from any animal. It wasn't a hiss or a growl or a scream. It was keening, a note of pure anguish that raised every hair on Gideon's arms. "Jesus," Boyd breathed, stepping back. "What's wrong with it?" It knows, Gideon said. It knows that smell. That's its person. Boyd's face went pale. You're saying this wild bobcat belonged to the girl? I'm saying they belong to each other. Gideon took the backpack and approached the cage slowly. The bobcat pressed against the mesh, still making that heartbreaking sound, its whole body vibrating with need. He held the bag where it could smell but not reach. Boyd, he said quietly, I need you to pull any records you have on that accident. I need to know everything about the girl, and I need to know who she is. The ranger made calls while Gideon sat with the grieving animal. By noon, they had a name, Ivy Callahan, 12 years old, selective mutism, hadn't spoken since her father died 12 years ago. Father's name, Marcus Callahan. Gideon's blood turned to ice. Let me see a photo, he said. Boyd pulled up the driver's license on his phone. A man in his 30s smiled at the camera, but it was the eyes that Gideon recognized. Marcus had been on his crew. Marcus had died in the fire. One of the three men Gideon had tried and failed to save. Oh God, Gideon whispered. He sat down heavily, the room tilting around him. I didn't know he had a daughter. I didn't know. The bobcat had quieted, perhaps exhausted by its grief, and now sat pressed against the mesh nearest to where Gideon held the backpack. It reached through with one paw, stretching, trying to touch the fabric. Boyd was talking, pulling up more records. Looks like the girl's been living with her aunt since her dad died. Aunt works nights, so Ivy's alone a lot. School records show she's been getting lunch detention for skipping class, but no one bothered to figure out why. He scrolled through his phone. Wildlife reports show regular sightings of a bobcat near the Callahan property going back 6 months. Small one, probably the runt of a litter. Reports say it showed no fear of humans, which is unusual. She was feeding it, Gideon said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, looks like it. Found a makeshift feeding station under an oak tree on the property. Fresh food dishes, water, even a little shelter someone built out of old boards. Gideon looked at the bobcat, at the stuffed rabbit still clutched in its paws. The rabbit, the girl made it. Boyd leaned in to look closer. You think, look at it, homemade. The stitching's uneven. The proportions are off. A kid made that. Gideon's mind raced, piecing it together. A girl who doesn't talk. A runt bobcat no one else wanted. They found each other. And now the kid's dying, Boyd said bluntly. Doctors give her maybe 48 hours. Brain swelling. Hypothermia did too much damage. Even if she wakes up, there'll be permanent issues. Gideon stood and walked to the cage. The bobcat met his eyes, and in that amber gaze he saw his own grief reflected back. Two beings who'd lost everything, trying desperately to protect the last fragment of what they loved. I need to check something, and he said. He unlocked the cage door, moving slowly enough that the bobcat could retreat if it wanted. Instead, it watched him, wary but not aggressive. Gideon knelt beside the stuffed rabbit and gently turned it over. The stitching on the belly was different from the rest, newer and clumsier. Someone had opened and resealed the toy. Gideon could feel something hard inside, heavier than stuffing should be. I need to open this, he told the cat. I'll be careful, I promise. He used his pocket knife to carefully cut the threads. The bobcat growled, but didn't attack. Inside the rabbit, nestled in the stuffing, was a plastic voice recorder. The cheap kind sold at drugstores. The wires had corroded from water damage. The battery compartment rusted shut. Gideon's hands shook as he pulled the device free. Tucked beside it was a Polaroid photograph, protected in a Ziploc bag. The image showed a girl, small for 12, wrapped in a too large coat, kneeling in snow beside a young bobcat. She was tying a knitted scarf around the cat's neck, and the cat was touching her face with one paw. Both looked at the camera with expressions of pure contentment. Boyd, Gideon called, I need your repair kit, and I need it now. For the next hour, Gideon worked on the voice recorder while the bobcat watched from inches away, its breath warm on his hands. He cleaned corrosion with vinegar, replaced the batteries from the station's supply, reconnected wires with electrical tape. The bobcat never took its eyes off the device, as though it understood this small plastic box held something precious. Finally, Gideon pressed the play button. Static hissed. Then a child's voice, thin and uncertain, as though unused to speaking, "Mock. That's your name? Mock. Because you're small but brave. Don't be afraid of thunder. Okay, brave people know how to protect others, and you protect me. I have to watch over you too. If I accidentally fall asleep, you keep this. Okay? So you remember, I love you most in the world, most in the whole world." The recording clicked off. The bobcat, Mock, made a sound like a sob. Gideon sat back, tears running unchecked down his weathered face. He understood now. Understood everything. Ivy had known, somehow, that she might not come back. Had known that her trips into the forest with Mock were dangerous. So she'd left her voice behind. A promise recorded in plastic and wire, sewn into the one thing Mock treasured. "Boyd," he said, his voice thick. "Tell me exactly what happened at that accident scene." The ranger consulted his notes. Ant's car went off the road around 8 p.m. during the storm. Driver died on impact. Girl was found 20 feet away, at the edge of the tree line. Preliminary report said the bobcat had dragged her there by her collar. We thought it was trying to eat her, so we were going to put it down. But then the tranq dart hit, and we saw it wasn't biting. It was trying to move her. Move her where? Toward the main road, toward where someone might find her. Gideon closed his eyes. It was trying to save her. How long between the accident and when you found them? 8 hours, give or take. Why? And the girl's alive. Hypothermic, comatose, but alive after 8 hours in freezing rain. Understanding dawned on Boyd's face. The cat kept her warm. More than that, Gideon gestured to the bobcat. When a cat purrs, it's not just noise. The frequency is between 20 and 140 hertz. Studies show that range promotes bone healing, reduces pain, and can help regulate breathing and heart rate. You're saying the cat was purring on her chest for 8 hours, acting like a living pacemaker, keeping her heart beating while her body temperature dropped. Mock kept Ivy alive. Boyd sat down hard. Christ, we almost killed it. But you didn't. Gideon looked at the bobcat, at Mock, who sat with the stuffed rabbit pressed against its chest. The question is, what do we do now? The answer came to Gideon in the middle of the night, during his shift. He'd been sitting with Mock, tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair in a steady rhythm. The bobcat, which had been pacing anxiously, stopped and looked at him, then, slowly, it laid down and closed its eyes. Gideon kept tapping. Mock kept sleeping. When Gideon's rhythm faltered from exhaustion, Mock would wake instantly and approach the mesh, purring loud enough for Gideon to hear, as though trying to return the favor of comfort. "You're keeping watch," Gideon murmured. "You think it's your job to protect everyone. Don't you, just like Ivy told you? Brave people protect others." In the morning, Gideon called County General Hospital and asked for Ivy's doctor. What he proposed was insane, probably illegal, and definitely against hospital policy. But he knew people, knew which strings to pull. By afternoon, Ranger Boyd had secured permission to bring evidence related to the case into Ivy's room for identification purposes. The evidence, wrapped carefully in Gideon's jacket, was a stuffed rabbit with a repaired ear. County General smelled like antiseptic and fear. Gideon walked the hallways with the rabbit tucked under his arm, Boyd running interference with security. Ivy's room was in the ICU, a small space crowded with machines that beeped and hummed and breathed for the child who couldn't breathe for herself. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Tubes ran into her arms, her nose, her chest. Her dark hair had been shaved on one side to relieve pressure on her brain. The aunt sat in a chair by the window, her face gray with exhaustion. "Was Callahan," Gideon said quietly. "I'm Gideon Hayes. I worked with Marcus." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You're the one who survived." "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I never reached out before. I should have checked on you. On Ivy. I'm sorry." "She wouldn't have talked to you anyway," the aunt said tiredly. "She hasn't spoken since Marcus died. Not a word. I thought maybe time would help, but it's been 12 years. Gideon moved to the bedside and looked down at Ivy. Her face was peaceful, unmarked by the violence that had taken her mother's sister and nearly taken her. He thought of Marcus, of the young father who'd shown him photos of his baby girl during slow shifts. "I have something that belongs to her," Gideon said. He unwrapped the rabbit and placed it carefully on the pillow beside Ivy's head. Then he found the voice recorder ear, cleaned and repaired, and pressed play. Ivy's own voice filled the room. "Mock, don't be afraid of thunder. Brave people know how to protect others. I have to watch over you. If I accidentally fall asleep, you keep this. Okay, I love you most in the world." The aunt gasped. "That's her voice. That's Ivy talking." On the bed, something changed. Ivy's fingers twitched. The heart monitor's rhythm shifted, strengthening. Her eyelids fluttered. "Play it again," the doctor said. Rushing in at the sound of the alarms, Gideon pressed play. This time, Ivy's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, confused by the lights and the tubes and the strange room. Then they found the rabbit, found the familiar worn fabric and torn ear, and the weight of a promise sewn into its belly. Ivy's hand moved, shaking, to touch the toy. Her lips formed a word, a yemmergun. Though no sound came out at first, she tried again. And this time Gideon could read the shape, Mock. "The cat's alive," he said quickly, kneeling beside the bed so she could see his face. "Mock's alive and safe. Mock saved you, Ivy, kept you warm and kept your heart beating until help came. The bravest cat I've ever seen." Tears slid down Ivy's face. "See you, Shim." Her hand moved in slow, deliberate patterns. The aunt leaned forward. "She's signing," she said. "She wants to know where Mock is." "At the rescue station, waiting for you." Gideon took Ivy's hand gently. "Mock wouldn't let anyone touch this rabbit. Kept it safe for you. Kept watch all night, every night, just like you asked." Ivy's mouth opened. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse and unused, barely more than a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, sir." The aunt burst into whiz. The doctor stood frozen, staring. Gideon felt 12 years of grief crack open in his chest. And for the first time since the fire, he felt something other than guilt. He felt purpose. 2 weeks later, Ivy came to the rescue station in a wheelchair, her aunt pushing. She'd been released from the hospital the day before, with instructions for physical therapy and follow-up appointments and warnings about what she might never fully recover. But she was alive. She was talking. And she was asking for her cat. Gideon had prepared Mock's cage, had explained to the Bobcat in words he knew it couldn't understand but hoped it could feel that Ivy was coming, that the wait was over. When Ivy's wheelchair came through the door, Mock stood up from where it had been curled around the rabbit and stared. "Open it," Gideon told Boyd. The ranger unlocked the cage door and stepped back. Mock walked out slowly, limping slightly on the leg that had finally healed. The Bobcat moved across the concrete floor with perfect precision. Eyes locked on Ivy. It stopped directly in front of the wheelchair, sat down, and picked up the stuffed rabbit it had carried with it. Then Mock placed the rabbit gently in Ivy's lap. Ivy's face crumpled. She leaned forward, gathering Mock into her arms, burying her face in the amber and brown fur. The Bobcat purred, that deep rumbling frequency that healed and comforted and promised protection. They stayed that way for a longer time span. Two broken beings holding each other while the humans watched. Finally, Ivy pulled back and looked at Gideon. "Can Mock come home?" "Already arranged it," he said. "Your aunt's backyard is perfect. I'll help you build a proper enclosure, and I'll come back to check on things. Make sure Mock stays healthy." "Will you visit a lot?" Ivy asked. Gideon found himself smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, I'll visit a lot." That night, after Ivy and Mock had gone home together, Gideon sat in his small apartment and opened the wooden box he kept in his closet. Inside were the remnants of his old life, his wedding ring, Sarah's favorite photo, the memorial card from the service for his crew. He touched each item, said a quiet goodbye, and closed the lid. He didn't lock it, didn't hide it away, but for the first time in 12 years, looking at these memories didn't pull him into the darkness. The next afternoon, Gideon drove to the Callahan house. The backyard was large, bordered by forest, perfect territory for a bobcat. He and Boyd spent the day building a proper enclosure, high fences, a warm shelter, space to run. Mock supervised from Ivy's lap, purring loud enough to hear across the yard, When the work was done, they released Mock into the new space. The Bobcat explored cautiously, checking every corner, every hiding spot, but it kept circling back to where Ivy sat at the fence, reaching through to touch her hand. Mock could leave any time, Gideon told Ivy. Bobcats can climb, can dig. If Mock wants to go back to the wild, you have to let it happen. I know, Ivy said, but I don't think Mock wants to leave. She was right. As the sun set over the Wachita forest, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Mock settled beside the fence where Ivy sat on the other side. The stuffed rabbit sat between them, worn and loved and still holding its secret recording of promises. Gideon drove home as darkness fell, windows down, breathing in the forest air. When he pulled into his driveway, he realized he was humming. He couldn't remember the last time he'd made music. Inside, he made dinner, ate it slowly, tasting each bite, washed his dishes, turned on the television, though he barely watched it. Around midnight, he finally lay down in bed and closed his eyes. For the first time in 12 years, Gideon Hayes fell asleep without checking the locks 3 times, without lying awake cataloging his failures, without wishing he'd stayed in the fire. He slept deeply, dreamlessly, peacefully, because somewhere across town, a 12-year-old girl and a scarred bobcat were doing the same, their watching finally over. And in the morning, Gideon would wake up with purpose. He had rounds to make, an enclosure to maintain, a girl to check on. He had people who needed him. He had a reason to keep watch over the living instead of the dead. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to give everything you have to save someone else. Love is the language that breaks through pain and silence, that turns strangers into family under the vast Arkansas sky. Gideon had learned that truth through fire and loss and the unlikely grace of a bobcat and a child who refused to give up on each other. He'd been keeping vigil over graves for over a decade. Now, finally, he could rest, because other hearts were beating steady and strong, protected by the watch he'd helped keep. And that, Gideon understood at last, was what Marcus and Sarah and his crew would have wanted. Not for him to join them in death, but to honor them by choosing life. The night shift was over, morning had come, and Gideon Hayes was finally, truly ready to live in it. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.